I do not know who is still hearing this. I do not know if this is going out past my block, past my town, past anything. I hear my own voice in the headphones, and that is about all I can promise. My name is Hale Rook. I live in Woodbridge Township, New Jersey. I work nights and early mornings at the produce warehouse off the Turnpike corridor, the kind of place that stays invisible until people cannot buy tomatoes anymore. I am not an expert. I do not have a badge. I do not have a camera crew. I have a pallet scanner that still sits in my work bag, a cheap portable radio, and a little setup I built out of parts that were easy to pull from what was already around me. A car battery, an inverter, a microphone from an old computer headset, and a small transmitter board that I had bought months ago because I mess around with radio stuff when I cannot sleep. That is the whole story of why I am talking right now. Not bravery, not a mission. I was bored, tired, and I hated feeling helpless. If you want the start, the real start, it was a single report buried in the morning news while I was eating leftover rice and eggs at my kitchen counter. A cluster of pneumonia cases. Severe. Unusual. That word, unusual, was doing heavy lifting. It sounded calm. It sounded handled. That was day one for me, even though I did not call it day one yet. I just thought, great, another thing. Another headline I cannot afford to care about. At work, day one looked normal. Forklifts beeping. The sweet rot smell that hangs around banana pallets. Even when the building is cold. The dock plates rattling when a trailer backs in. Guys arguing over whose turn it is to wrap. I scan pallets. That is my job. Check label, check count, check temperature strip if it has one, log it, move on. Most people picture food arriving in neat lines. Real life is a mess of substitutions and partials and drivers who show up late with a story. Day two, that pneumonia report vanished. Not we were wrong, not it resolved, just gone. The same hosts talked about a storm system, sports, a celebrity divorce, then a long segment about investing during uncertain times. I remember because I laughed out loud at that part. Investing. I was checking my bank app every other day, trying to decide which bill could slide without turning into a bigger problem. Day three, the report came back with a new name. Not pneumonia cluster anymore. Black flu, that is what they said on air. 2 words that sounded made up, then instantly sounded permanent. That was the first moment I felt my stomach drop. Not fear, not panic. More basic than that. A sense that the people reading the news were already late, already catching up to something that had moved on without them. I drove past the emergency room at Hackensack Meridian in Old Bridge on my way to pick up a cheap cold medicine for my seasonal allergies. The parking lot was packed, not full in a normal way, full of cars idling with headlights on in the gray morning, no one walking between them, no one standing in groups smoking, no families going in and out, just cars, running, sitting there. I circled once, saw a nurse by the side door in a mask, and the nurse was just standing still, staring at the line of cars. I did not even park. Something in me said, do not join that. When the news shows hospitals during a normal disaster, you see the entrance, the ambulances, the press gaggle, the people crying. That week you saw none of it. Only press rooms. Only officials behind podiums with flags. Only clean audio and controlled angles. The first time I noticed it, I told myself I was being dramatic. The second time, I started keeping a notebook on my kitchen table and writing down what I heard, what I did, and what did not add up. Day 4 was the first guidance shift. Wash hands. Stay home if sick. The basics. Then, in the same day, another voice came on later and said, there was no evidence of sustained human transmission in the region. That phrase, sustained human transmission, hit me because it sounded technical but also slippery. It gave people something to cling to. It let everyone pretend it was contained without saying contained. At the warehouse, day 4 looked like a couple of no-shows and one driver refusing to break the seal on his trailer until our supervisor promised him a dock door with no other workers nearby. That is not normal behavior. Drivers can be cranky, sure, but this was different. He was scared, and he was trying to hide it under attitude. He kept wiping his hands on his jeans. He had gloves in his cup holder and would not put them on because I swear he was worried that if he put them on, he would admit something was real. We still had produce, but the mix started changing. Less leafy greens, more potatoes, more onions, more stuff that survives sitting. I asked the receiving guy, a thick-necked older dude named Manny, what was up. Manny shrugged and said, suppliers are playing games. That was his whole explanation. Manny always thinks someone is playing games. It is his default setting. That day I wanted to believe him. Day 5 was the first panic buying wave in my area. You could feel it before you saw it. Cars on Route 9 moving weird, people driving fast, stopping short, turning without signals. Then I went into a grocery store in Sayreville after my shift, and the shelves were stripped in the middle aisles. Rice, pasta, canned soup, gone. The produce was still there, which made no sense to me. People were buying the dry stuff because it feels safe. The fresh stuff still looked normal in the lights, still smelled normal, so it did not trigger the same alarm in their heads. I stood there holding a bag of oranges, watching a woman argue with an employee because there was a limit on bottled water. The employee was a kid, maybe 19. He kept saying, "I do not control it." The woman kept saying, "My family needs it." Both statements were true. That is the kind of argument that starts wars in small places. 2 truths, 1 shelf. Day 6, the rumor engine kicked in. Group chats, screenshots, voice memos with shaky breathing. Somebody said the Newark airport was shutting down. Somebody else said it was fine. Somebody else said the National Guard was moving into the Meadowlands. I heard 10 versions of the same story, and none of them had a solid detail. None of them had a name attached. None of them had a timestamp that made sense. The radio sounded calmer than the phone, and that is backwards from normal life now. Normally, you trust a person you know more than a voice in a box. That week, the voices you knew were the loudest and the least careful. Day 7, a funeral home worker called into a talk show. I heard it while I was taking a shower after work, water running, radio turned up on the sink. The caller was a man with a tired voice. He did not sound dramatic. He sounded annoyed, which is what got my attention. He said they were running out of storage. He said the paperwork was piling up. He said families were being told to wait. He started saying something about a refrigerated truck, and the host cut him off. Hard cut. Not even a smooth transition. The host laughed, said they had to go to traffic, and then a pre-recorded ad played. In my notebook I wrote, "First honest voice, deleted." Day 8, my warehouse got our first real disruption. 3 inbound deliveries canceled within 2 hours. Not delayed. Canceled. No reschedule. The dispatcher on the phone sounded stressed and kept repeating that the driver declined the route. Declined. That is what you say when a route is optional. Food routes are not optional in a normal world. Our supervisor, Rich Delaney, tried to act normal. Rich is a middle-aged guy who wears a warehouse vest even when he is not on the floor because it makes him feel official. Rich called a quick huddle and told us corporate said everything was fine and we just had to stay flexible. Somebody asked about masks. Rich said masks were not necessary unless you were sick. Somebody asked what to do if a coworker came in sick. Rich said send him home. Easy answer from a man who does not lose wages when someone goes home. Day 9, I started seeing the black flu name more. Not on the radio as much, but on printed notices taped in building lobbies and store windows. Due to black flu precautions. That phrase turned it from a headline into a reason. A reason for closed doors, reduced hours, no refunds. The disease became a tool, not just a threat. That night, I took out the small box of supplies I keep under my bed, the half-joking emergency stash I used to call my storm kit. Water jugs, canned food, extra batteries. A couple of cheap face masks from a hardware store, duct tape, bleach. I did not feel prepared. I felt embarrassed that I'd ever thought this was enough for anything serious. Day 10, the first real sickness hit our warehouse crew. Not a rumor, not someone's cousin, not a social media clip. A guy on the loading side named Jermaine showed up late, sweating, eyes glassy. He kept saying he was fine. Rich told him to go home. Jermaine argued. He needed the hours. Rich stood his ground for once and walked him out. Jermaine coughed into his hand on the way, wiped it on his pants, and I watched 3 people flinch without meaning to. The next morning, Jermaine was not back. Rich said Jermaine was resting. Manny said Jermaine was at the hospital. Another guy said Jermaine's girlfriend texted that he could not breathe well. By lunch, the story was that Jermaine got taken to a facility. No one knew what that meant. It just sounded official enough to shut down questions. Day 11, the state guidance changed again. Not just wash hands anymore. Now it was avoid gatherings. Stores started putting tape on the floor at checkout lines, spacing people out. That part actually made sense. The part that did not make sense was the tone. The voice on the radio kept saying, "out of an abundance of caution." That phrase makes people feel safe. It suggests you are doing extra. What it really meant was nobody had control. I stopped going to the gym. I stopped taking the elevator in my apartment building. I took stairs and held my breath on the landings because the air felt stale and shared. I started wiping down my door handle with diluted bleach. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand how fast a person turns into someone he does not recognize. Not from one big moment, from 100 small choices that all feel reasonable. Day 12, I woke up with a mild fever. I checked it 3 times because I did not trust the cheap thermometer. I felt warm, heavy, and stupidly angry. Not scared yet. Angry. I had been careful. I had kept my distance. I had done the little rituals. Then my body just shrugged and said none of that mattered. I called out of work and Rich sounded annoyed. He tried to hide it under concern. He asked if I had a cough. I said no. He asked if I could come in anyway and work away from people. I told him that is not how warehouses work. Rich went quiet, then said, "Do what you have to do." That is what managers say when they mean you are disposable. I stayed in my apartment and listened to the radio all day. I heard the same talking points rotate. Supply chains stable. Hospitals prepared. Do not panic. Keep routines. Stay calm. I kept thinking about the parking lot full of idling cars at the emergency room. That image would not leave me. Cars are not a symptom. Cars are behavior. Behavior tells the truth before officials do. Day 13, my fever broke. I felt wrung out but not wrecked. I told myself I got lucky. I also told myself the black flu was being exaggerated. I did both at once. That is the part I am not proud of. I wanted to go back to normal so badly that I tried to bargain with reality. A mild fever became proof, in my head, that it was all manageable. That is denial with a work badge on. Day 14, I went back to work. The building felt different. Not emptier exactly, but tense. People kept space without talking about it. Nobody shook hands. Nobody shared tools without wiping them down. A box of gloves sat open on the supervisor desk and was already half empty. Masks started showing up on faces, mostly the older workers and a couple of guys who had kids at home. Rich wore no mask, and that mattered. People take their cues from the person who signs their hours. Inbound loads were down again. We were stretching inventory by relabeling partial pallets, combining loads, shifting deliveries between stores. This is the part most people do not see. Before shelves go empty, there is a week where everything is still in the building, but the math gets weird. You start sending half loads to 10 places instead of full loads to 5. You start substituting items and praying nobody notices. You start pushing potatoes harder because potatoes do not betray you. Day 15, the first real closure hit near me. The public schools announced remote learning. Not closed, not shut down, remote. Another soft word. Parents scrambled. You could hear it in the voices on call-in shows. People were not arguing about disease anymore. People were arguing about rent, childcare, groceries, the basics. Disease is scary, sure, but hunger is a direct threat. Bills are a direct threat. The radio hosts kept trying to steer the conversation back to public health, and callers kept dragging it back to I cannot miss work. That night I heard the first mention of a hospital's staff shortages. Not an official statement, more a sideways comment from a nurse who called in under a first name only. She said people were coming in late stage. She said the hallways were full. She said the supply closet was empty of certain things and she would not name them on air. The host thanked her and moved on fast. I wrote in my notebook, "Truth leaks through cracks." Day 16, the warehouse got a memo printed on plain paper. No letterhead. It said health screening at entry. That meant questions and a forehead temperature check, done by a tired security guard with a handheld device. The guard did not know what to do if someone failed. He just looked at Rich. Rich looked at corporate policy on his phone. People stood in a line breathing the same air, waiting to be declared safe by a gadget. It was theater. It made everyone feel worse. That same day, a refrigeration repair company canceled on us. One of our cooler units had been acting up, cycling weird. Normally, a tech shows up within hours. This time, the dispatcher said, "We are not sending anyone into food facilities right now." I asked why. She said, "Company policy." I asked when. She said, "No date." That meant if the cooler died, our inventory died with it. Day 17, I watched my first argument turn physical over groceries. Not in my building, in a parking lot outside a discount store in Edison. 2 men fought over a case of bottled water. Not because one needed it more, because the case existed. And they both wanted control of it. People stood around filming. Nobody stepped in. A police cruiser rolled by slow and did not stop. The officer looked straight ahead. That was another cue. When cops stop playing referee, society loses a layer. At home, my building felt louder. Doors slamming. People yelling in hallways. Somebody on the third floor was coughing hard every night and nobody would say who it was. The superintendent posted a notice about keeping noise down. That was the solution offered. Keep noise down during a pandemic. I started keeping my own trash inside longer because I did not want to touch the dumpster lid. I started wearing gloves to check my mail. Day 18 is when my life changed from I am watching this to I am in this. I came back from work around 6:30 p.m. I was unlocking my door when I heard a thud in the hallway behind me. Not loud, just heavy. I turned and saw my neighbor Denise Calder on the floor, half in front of her door, half in the hallway. Denise is a single mom, works at a nail salon in Iceland. Quiet, polite, always looks tired. Her kid Troy is 9 years old and he plays with a little plastic basketball hoop in the living room. I know that because I hear it through the wall sometimes. Denise tried to push herself up and could not. Her face looked gray, sweat on her hairline. She was breathing fast, shallow. Troy was behind her crying and repeating, "Mom, get up." I froze for 1 second, just long enough to hate myself for it. Then I grabbed Denise under the shoulders and dragged her into my apartment because leaving her in the hallway felt worse. My brain was shouting about contamination. My hands were already moving anyway. I sat Denise on my kitchen floor. She kept trying to speak and it came out garbled. Troy stood in my doorway, shaking. I told him to come inside and sit on the couch. He did not move until I said it again, louder, and I heard my own voice crack. I called 911. The line rang. Then a recording told me to stay on the line. I stayed. I listened to the recording loop 3 times. Then it clicked, and a woman answered in a flat voice. I said my neighbor collapsed, trouble breathing. The woman asked if Denise had a fever. I said I did not know. The woman asked if Denise had traveled recently. I said I did not know. The woman asked if Denise had known contact with a confirmed case. I said I did not know. The woman told me to isolate Denise, open a window and avoid direct contact. I told her Denise was already in my kitchen and I had already touched her. The woman paused, then read another script about washing hands and monitoring symptoms. I asked if an ambulance was coming. She said resources were limited and she could not give an estimated time. I grabbed the cheap thermometer and checked Denise. It read 102 Fahrenheit. Denise's eyes were half open. She tried to stand and her legs just did not cooperate. Troy kept whispering, "Mom," over and over. I told him to go to my bathroom and wash his hands. He did it fast, too fast. I told him to do it again, slower, and he snapped. I did it. That kid had never snapped at me before. He was not being rude, he was breaking. I set Denise up on my couch with a blanket and pillows. I did not know what else to do. I put a trash bag nearby in case she got sick. I wiped down every surface I could remember touching. I opened my windows even though it was chilly. I told Troy to pack a small bag from his apartment. He said he could not go in there alone. I went with him, covered my face with a scarf because I did not have enough masks to waste, and we went into Denise's place. Denise's apartment smelled of nail polish and laundry detergent. Her phone was on the kitchen counter with missed calls on the screen. I tried calling the last number she had dialed. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. Denise collapsed. Troy is with me. Call me. I did not even sign it. My hands were shaking. Troy grabbed a backpack and stuffed in clothes without folding. He grabbed a handheld game console. I almost told him to leave it. Then I stopped myself. That console was comfort. Comfort was medicine now. Back in my place, Denise drifted in and out. Her breathing sounded wet. That is the only way I can describe it without getting graphic. Wet breathing. I sat on my kitchen chair 6 feet away, staring at the radio on my counter, listening to the same calm voices talk about flattening the curve and temporary measures. None of it helped me in my living room. Day 19, no ambulance came. I called again. I got the same scripts. Denise was worse. Troy had stopped crying and started going silent, which scared me more. He sat on the carpet with his knees up, holding the game console but not turning it on. Just holding it. I made him eat toast. I made him drink water. I kept disinfecting doorknobs that nobody was touching. It was my way of pretending I had control. I called Denise's sister, Maribel, because I found a sticky note on Denise's fridge with a number and the word SIS. Maribel answered on the 3rd try. She was crying. She said her husband had a fever and she could not leave her apartment in Perth Amboy. She said she had called Denise earlier and got no answer. She said, "Is she dead?" I said no. I did not know if that was true. I said no anyway. Maribel told me she would try to get help. Then her phone died mid-sentence. Not hung up. Dead. I stared at my phone, then at the charger. Then at the wall outlet. Power was still on, but I had this cold realization. Communication is fragile even before the grid fails. People just disappear behind drained batteries and full voicemail boxes. That afternoon, I decided I was not waiting for a system that was not coming. I made my own plan, the simplest version that matched my apartment. I put Denise in my bedroom because it has the best airflow and a door I could close. I put Troy on the couch with a blanket. I moved my own sleeping stuff to the living room floor. I set up a hand washing station by the bathroom sink with soap, bleach solution for surfaces, and a separate towel that I changed daily. I boiled water in a pot even though the tap still ran fine because my head was spinning and I needed one rule I could follow. Day 20, I started coughing. Not constant. Just enough that I noticed. My chest felt tight. I sat on the floor and tried not to panic. Troy heard me cough and his eyes went wide. I told him it was allergies. That was a lie. I told him it was probably nothing. That was also a lie. I told him I was going to be okay. That one I needed to believe, so I said it until it sounded real. The radio that day ran a government broadcast. A polished voice said measures were working. The voice said hospitals were managing surge capacity. The voice said there were localized disruptions in supply, but core services were stable. I wrote down the phrases and realized none of them meant anything. Managing can mean overwhelmed. Localized can mean everywhere, just not acknowledged. Core services can mean police and nothing else. Day 21. My warehouse called. Rich asked if I could come in. I laughed. I asked if Rich knew what was happening in my apartment. Rich said he was sorry, then asked again if I could come in. He said they were short-staffed. He said the warehouse was critical infrastructure. I told him I had a sick neighbor in my bedroom and a kid on my couch, and I was coughing. Rich went quiet. Then he said, "Do what you have to do." Again, disposable words. That night, I heard shouting outside. I looked out my window and saw 3 people arguing around a car in the lot. One person held a metal pipe. Another held a bag of groceries. I could not hear the words, just the tone. A neighbor in another building turned on a floodlight and somebody yelled at him to shut it off. The floodlight stayed on for a minute, then clicked off. The argument ended with the person with groceries getting in the car and peeling out. The person with the pipe kicked the curb until his foot hurt. That is what the end of order looks like. Not Mad Max, just tired people fighting over a bag. Day 22, Denise stopped responding. She was still breathing, but she was gone in the eyes. I checked her pulse with 2 fingers on her wrist, the way you see in movies. Except I was not acting. I was counting. I was making sure she was still here. Troy asked to see her. I told him no. He begged. I still said no. He hated me for it for about an hour, then he went back to silent. I became the villain because he needed one. That afternoon, I finally got through to a hotline that claimed it could dispatch a home health visit. A man answered and sounded exhausted. He asked for Denise's symptoms. I listed them. He said, "Sir, I am going to be straight with you. We are not sending anyone." I asked what I should do. He told me to monitor breathing and call emergency services if she stopped breathing. I said emergency services were not coming. He paused, then said, "Then keep her comfortable." That was the whole healthcare system reduced to one sentence. Day 23. The warehouse situation hit my doorstep in a different way. A guy I recognized from work, not a close friend, more a familiar face named Stefan, knocked on my door. I did not open it. I talked through the door. Stefan said he was checking on people. He asked if I had food. I said yes. He asked if I could spare some. I said I had a kid in my apartment and a sick woman. Stefan said he was sorry, and then, real quiet, he asked if I had any masks. I told him I had a few. He asked for one. I said no. I hated myself for it, but I said no. Stefan did not argue. He said, "Okay," and walked away. I watched through the peephole while he stood in the hallway and leaned his forehead against the wall for a second, then kept going door to door. That image stayed with me. Not because Stefan was dangerous, because Stefan was turning into a scavenger without wanting to. Day 24, Troy spiked a fever. Not high, but enough. He told me his throat hurt. I gave him children's cold medicine from Denise's bag, checked the dosage twice, and realized how thin my supplies were. My mind started running the math. If I got worse, who feeds Troy? If Troy got worse, who carries him to help? If Denise died, what do I do with her body? That last thought made me stand up and pace because my brain was trying to go somewhere I did not want to go. On the radio, they started talking about continuity of government. That phrase showed up more and more. It is a fancy way of saying the people in charge are protecting their ability to stay in charge. I did not blame them for wanting that. I blamed them for pretending it meant my building was safe. Day 25, I started this broadcast. Not because I wanted to be a voice, because I needed to talk to someone who was not Troy, not Denise, not a scripted hotline. I set up the battery on my kitchen floor, ran wires to the inverter, checked my little transmitter board, and tested the microphone with my own voice. The first time I heard myself coming through the radio speaker across the room, I felt stupid. The second time, I felt relief, a strange relief but real. If you are hearing this, I want you to know the black flu is not just sickness. It is the way systems fail in slow steps. First, information gets weird. Not absent, just weird. Then staffing gets thin. Then the people who fix things stop coming. Then supplies shift from fresh to durable. Then rules change daily, and every change makes people more aggressive because they think the next change will be worse. That is the pattern I saw. Day 26, the power flickered in my building for the first time. Just a blink. Lights off, lights on. Troy jumped. I pretended it was nothing. I checked my phone and saw no service for a full minute. Then it came back. I realized I had been assuming power would stay. Assuming water would stay. Assuming the tap and the light switch were permanent. That assumption is a drug. When it wears off, you feel naked. That day, I heard sirens again. Farther away. Not the constant scream from earlier weeks, more occasional. That could mean fewer emergencies or fewer responders. I do not know which is worse. I also heard a helicopter overhead near dusk, heading toward Newark, and I realized I had not heard many helicopters lately. Air traffic had thinned. The sky was quieter. Day 27, Denise died. I am saying it plain because dressing it up would be a lie. I woke up around 4 in the morning because the apartment was too quiet. I went to check on her and her chest was still. I checked her neck for a pulse anyway. Nothing. I stood there for a full minute just staring, waiting for my brain to tell my body what to do. It did not. I closed the bedroom door. I sat on the kitchen floor and put my head in my hands. I did not cry right away. I felt empty. Then I heard Troy's small footsteps in the hallway and I snapped into motion because he could not see her. Not yet. Not that way. He asked where his mom was. I told him she was resting. He stared at me and said, "You are lying." I said, "Yes." That was the first time I did not try to soften it. I explained as gently as I could, no big words, no speeches. I told him she was not breathing anymore. I told him she was gone. Troy made a sound that I will not forget. Not loud, not dramatic, just a broken sound. He tried to push past me to the bedroom and I blocked him. He hit my chest with his fists. Not hard. He was 9. I let him hit me until he got tired. Then I held him while he shook. I could not leave Denise in my bedroom. I also could not call anyone to come take her. I did the only thing that made sense in my head. I put on gloves, covered my face with a mask, wrapped Denise in a sheet, and moved her into the bathtub. It was practical. It was awful. The bathroom stays cooler. The door closes. It buys time. That is what the world had become, making choices based on time bought. Day 28, Troy's fever dropped. Mine stayed low, but steady. We were both coughing a little. We stayed inside. I fed him oatmeal and canned soup. I ate whatever was easiest. I kept broadcasting in short bursts because the battery would not last forever, and I had to save power for light at night. I heard other voices sometimes, weak and scattered. Not many. A man somewhere north talking about store closures in Patterson. A woman crying and asking if anyone knew where to find insulin. A kid joking too loud about looting, trying to sound tough. Nobody had answers. People just wanted to be heard. Day 29, my warehouse sent a message to everyone, not a call, a group text. It said the facility was temporarily suspended, and staff should await further instructions. That was it. My income vanished in one sentence. I stared at the screen and felt this cold clarity. The job was never stability. It was just motion. The moment motion stops, you see what you really have. I had a small pantry, a kid who depended on me, and a building full of strangers. That afternoon, I heard pounding on doors in the hallway. Not police, just people. A neighbor was going door to door asking if anyone had food, saying he had a sick father. Some doors stayed closed. One door opened and someone yelled at him to get out. He kept going anyway. I did not open my door. I stood behind it and listened. I hated that I did not open. I also hated that if I opened once, I might not be able to close the world out again. Day 30, the government broadcast came back, louder and more confident than anything I had heard in weeks. The voice said, "Containment achieved." Those exact words. It said new measures had succeeded. It said people should prepare to return to normal activity in phases. It said there would be targeted support for critical supply nodes. I listened with my notebook open and I realized I was not relieved. I was suspicious. 2 hours after that broadcast, my warehouse called me from a number I did not recognize. A recorded message told me to report to the facility for special receiving. I almost did not go. Then I thought about food. I thought about Troy. I thought about my own pantry dwindling. I left Troy with a neighbor I trusted the least out of everyone, but still trusted more than nobody. A woman named Keisha, who lived across the hall and had been quietly decent through all this. I told her I would be back fast. I gave her 2 cans of soup as payment because nothing is free anymore, even kindness. Keisha did not ask for them. I offered anyway because it keeps the balance clean. I drove to the warehouse in the afternoon, down roads that looked normal until you really looked. Fewer cars, more debris and gutters, a couple of storefronts on Route 1 with handwritten signs. Closed, sick, back soon, no back soon. The sky was clear, the air felt cold. I parked and saw only 3 cars in the lot. No usual chaos, no line of trucks, just quiet. Inside, Rich was there with 2 security guards I had never seen before. Not our usual contracted guys. These men wore plain uniforms with no company logo. They carried themselves differently. One of them had a sidearm on his belt. I did not stare. I just noted it. Rich looked thinner. His eyes were red. He tried to sound upbeat and failed. He told me a shipment was coming in and corporate wanted it handled carefully. He told me only a few staff were cleared to receive it. A single trailer backed into dock, door 4. No branding, no usual produce supplier logo. Just a plain white trailer with grime streaks. The driver did not get out. The seal was already cut. That alone made my skin crawl because seals get cut for a reason. Rich told me to open the trailer and start moving the pallets into a cooler bay. He said keep the bay doors closed and limit exposure. Exposure to what? I asked. Rich said, just do it. I went into the trailer with a pallet jack. The air inside smelled wrong. Not rotten. Chemical. Sharp. The first pallet was wrapped in black plastic instead of clear. There was no paperwork pouch on it. No bill of lading. No manifest. Just a sheet of paper taped to the wrap. Handwritten in thick marker. Do not open indoors. I stood there with my hands on the pallet, jack handle, and felt my heart pounding in my throat. Rich was behind me asking what it said. I told him. One of the guards stepped closer. He leaned in, read it, then looked at Rich. Rich's face went blank. Rich asked me if I could move it anyway. I asked him what it was. Rich said he did not know. I asked him why there was no paperwork. Rich said corporate told him not to ask questions. I believed him. I also realized that was the whole problem. I backed out of the trailer and shut the dock door. Rich started arguing with me, quiet but intense, telling me we needed this. Telling me my job could come back if we cooperated. Telling me not to make it a thing. The guard with the sidearm watched both of us. I could see the calculation in his eyes. He did not care about produce. He cared about compliance. I told Rich I would not open it indoors. I told him we could move the pallets outside, cut the wrap in the open air, then decide what to do. Rich said corporate demanded it go straight into cold storage. I asked him again what it was. Rich said aid. That was his word. Aid is another soft word. Aid can be anything. Aid can be a gift or a trap. I left the warehouse without touching the pallet. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds selfish. I also know I have Troy at home and I have no obligation to die for a company that treated me as replaceable yesterday. On the drive back, I kept hearing that broadcast in my head. Containment achieved. Containment achieved. While a mystery shipment shows up with a warning taped to the wrap. Those two things do not fit together. Route 1 felt wrong in a quiet way. Not empty, not apocalyptic, just off. Fewer cars, more people walking with bags, some pushing carts that used to hold kids. A couple of buses still ran, but every stop looked tense. I passed a gas station with cones blocking the entrance, and a handwritten sign taped to the glass that said, "Cash only and limit 2 gallons." 2 gallons does not solve anything. 2 gallons just keeps you circling. I kept my windows up and the air on recirculate. That had become a habit. I used to do it only behind diesel trucks. Now I did it behind nothing. I drove past the old bridge emergency room again, and the lot looked worse. Cars were still idling. Some had condensation fogging every window. No movement. A police cruiser sat on the curb with no lights on. The officer stayed inside with the engine running. I did not pull in. I did not slow down. I just kept driving and told myself I would not need that place. When I got back to my building, Keisha opened her door right away. She looked me up and down, not with suspicion, with calculation. She asked if I was alone. I said yes. She told me not to linger in the hallway. She said 2 men had been knocking on doors, asking who had food, asking who still worked, asking who had medicine. She said one of the men came back later with a different tone and a different friend. I asked if Troy was okay. Keisha said Troy ate soup, watched television until the cable cut out, and sat quiet after that. She said he kept asking when his mom was coming back, then stopped asking. She did not say more than that. She did not need to. I could picture his face. I could picture the way he held his shoulders up when he was trying not to cry. I got inside my apartment and locked the deadbolt, then slid a chair under the knob, even though that chair would not stop anyone serious. It just helped my head. Troy was sitting on the couch with his knees pulled up, wearing the same clothes from yesterday. He looked at me and his eyes did not do the normal kid thing. No rush, no complaint, no relief. He said, "Did you get help?" I said no. I told him I went to my work. I told him I came back because I did not trust what I saw. He nodded and stared at the floor. Then he said, "Is she still in the bathroom?" I said yes. He nodded again. He did not ask to see her. He did not ask anything else. He just nodded and stayed still. I turned my radio setup on and did not transmit yet. I listened first. I heard the usual polished voices talking about phased reopening and targeted support. I heard one caller try to bring up bodies. The host cut him off fast and said they could not verify. I heard another caller ask about rent freezes. The host redirected to a website that did not load anymore for half the people. The whole thing felt detached from the streets I had just driven through. Then I heard something else. A thin voice, not polished, breaking in between other signals. A man said he worked sanitation in Newark and crews had stopped. He said dumpsters overflowed and rats were everywhere. He said a garbage truck got hijacked for fuel. He said he quit because his partner collapsed and no ambulance came. He was not asking for pity. He was warning people to keep trash inside, double bag, keep water sealed, watch for pest bites. The transmission cut out mid-sentence. The silence afterward felt heavy. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my notebook. I could keep hiding. I could keep the door locked and hope this building stayed boring enough to be ignored. Or I could go back to the warehouse and find out what that pallet was, because that warning had teeth. If it was nothing, it would be labeled. If it was normal aid, it would have paperwork. If it was dangerous, then people were about to do something stupid with it indoors. I told Troy we were going to keep things simple for the night. Eat, drink water, wash hands, sleep in shifts. He asked what shifts meant. I told him I would stay awake for a while, then he would wake me if he needed anything. He did not argue. He went to the bathroom, brushed his teeth without being told, and came back to the couch. That hurt more than his crying would have. A kid should not switch to survival mode this fast. I waited until Troy was asleep, then I transmitted. Short, clean. I said I saw a pallet at a warehouse with a warning that said do not open indoors. I said I did not know what was inside. I said anyone receiving unmarked shipments should treat them as hazardous until proven otherwise. I said open outdoors only, with distance, with airflow, with caution. I said the word containment meant nothing if the supply chain was bringing unknown materials into residential areas and food warehouses. I shut down the transmitter and kept listening. Around midnight, I heard sirens in the distance, then a single pop that sounded like a gunshot, then two more. Not close. Somewhere toward the commercial strip near Route 1. A few minutes later, I heard car engines rev and tires squeal. Then nothing. No police response. No lingering sirens. Just a quiet that made my skin tighten. I did not sleep much. I kept waking up to hallway noises. Footsteps, voices, a door slamming. Around 3 in the morning, I heard someone try my doorknob. Not a jiggle by accident. A slow turn, pressure, then a pause. Whoever it was tested the lock, then moved on. I stayed still with my hand on the kitchen knife I had left by the sink. That knife would not win against a man with a gun. It was still all I had. Morning came gray and cold. I made oatmeal and forced myself to eat even though my stomach did not want it. Troy ate 3 bites and said he was not hungry. I did not push. I just put a lid on the bowl and set it aside. Then I told him I had to go out for a couple hours. His eyes snapped up fast. He said, "Do not leave me." I told him Keisha would sit with him again. I told him I would come back. He stared at me for a long second, then nodded once. He did not believe me. He just accepted that my words were the only currency left. I packed a bag with gloves, my last decent mask, a cheap set of swim goggles I had bought years ago for a beach trip, and a small bottle of bleach solution in a travel container, not for drama, for fumes, for splashes, for any dumb accident. I also grabbed my phone, a charger, and a marker. If I saw something important, I wanted to leave a warning on it. Keisha answered her door before I even knocked. She had been awake. She asked where I was going. I told her the warehouse. Her face tightened. She told me not to. She told me people were getting hurt over supplies. I told her I did not want supplies. I wanted information. She stared at me and said, "Information gets people hurt too." I told her I knew. I asked her to watch Troy for 2 hours. She hesitated, then nodded. She told me if I was not back by noon, she would take Troy with her to her cousin's place in Piscataway. I said, okay. That was not a promise. That was a contingency plan. Driving back to the warehouse, I passed a line outside a pharmacy in Edison. People stood spaced out, most with masks, some with scarves. A security guard at the door held a clipboard and turned people away. 2 men argued. The guard raised his voice. The men stepped back but kept shouting. Nobody stepped in. Everyone watched and waited for it to turn into something else. At the warehouse lot, 2 more vehicles were parked than yesterday. One was a van with no markings. One was a pickup with a plastic tarp over the bed. I parked far away and walked slow, scanning. The air smelled normal until I got close to the dock area. Then I caught a sharp chemical bite in my nose, not strong enough to burn, just enough to warn. I did not go through the main entrance. I walked along the side where the dumpsters sat. The dumpsters were overflowing, lids up, because nobody wanted to touch them. Flies were thick. I kept my distance. I moved toward dock door 4, the one with the unmarked trailer yesterday. The dock door was open. That alone made my chest tighten. Rich always kept dock doors closed unless a truck was actively unloading. The open door meant panic or carelessness. I heard voices inside, loud, stressed. Then I heard coughing, hard coughing, the kind that comes from deep lungs. I stepped closer and saw Manny standing outside the door, bent over with his hands on his knees. He was coughing into his elbow. His face was wet with sweat. He looked up and saw me. He tried to speak, then coughed again. When he finally got words out, he said, "Do not go in." His voice was rough. He pointed at the dock door with a shaking hand. They opened it. I asked who opened it. Manny shook his head. He said the guard told Rich to move it into cold storage. Rich told Manny and 2 others to cut the wrap. Manny said he told Rich about the warning. Rich told him corporate wanted it indoors anyway. Manny said he refused. Another worker, a younger guy named Oscar, said he would do it because Oscar needed the hours. Oscar cut the wrap inside the cooler bay. Manny said it started with a hiss. I asked what hiss meant. Manny said something inside the pallet released gas. He said it was not smoke, not visible, just a sharp smell that filled the bay fast. He said Oscar started coughing and dropped the blade. He said one guard rushed in to pull Oscar out and stumbled. Manny said 2 more workers ran in without thinking. Manny said Rich tried to close the bay doors, then realized the tree trapped it inside. My throat tightened just hearing it. I could imagine that cooler bay turning into a sealed box full of poison air. I told Manny to move away from the door. I told him to sit down. He waved me off, stubborn. Manny always acts tough. He still moved back a few steps. I stood outside the dock door and looked in without crossing the threshold. The cooler bay doors were open. A forklift sat abandoned with the forks raised. A pallet jack lay on its side. Rich was inside, wearing a mask now, shouting at someone to open more doors. One of the plain uniformed guards stood near the bay entrance, hands up near his face, breathing fast. His eyes looked glassy. He had removed his sidearm and placed it on a table, maybe by instinct, maybe because he did not trust his hands. Oscar lay on the floor near the bay, not moving much. Another worker knelt beside him, trying to pull him by the shoulders. Rich yelled to drag him toward the dock door. The worker looked confused, slow, breathing shallow. That confused, slow look told me the air inside was still bad. I backed up, grabbed a cardboard box from near the dock and used it to fan air outward while staying outside. It was not heroic. It was something to do that did not require entering. Manny saw what I was doing and stumbled over, still coughing, and started fanning too. We made a crude wind tunnel, pushing air out toward the open dock. Rich saw us and shouted my name. He told me to come in and help. I shook my head and pointed at the warning on the torn wrap that was now crumpled on the floor. Rich yelled that he did not have a choice. I yelled back that he had choices yesterday. That shut him up for a second. A woman ran out of the building holding her throat. She ripped her mask off and vomited into the gravel. Then she sat down hard and started crying without sound. I did not recognize her. Not warehouse staff. She was probably from corporate or some contracted safety team. Her hair was pulled back tight, and she wore a reflective vest with no name. The guard by the bay entrance stumbled toward the dock and dropped to one knee. He tried to stand, then dropped again. Rich rushed toward him, then stopped short and backed away, remembering that his own lungs mattered too. The guard's partner grabbed him under the arm and dragged him outward. The partner's face was pale. He kept blinking hard, trying to clear his eyes. I heard a faint alarm inside. Not fire. One of the cooler unit alarms, the kind that chirps when temperature goes out of range or a door stays open. It kept chirping, calm, repetitive, not matching the chaos. That sound made me angry. The building was still trying to do its job while people were choking on a corporate decision. Manny told me his chest hurt. He tried to play it down, then coughed again and winced. I told him to sit. He refused. Then he sat anyway because his legs decided for him. I pulled my phone out and dialed 911, even though I knew what would happen. The call did not connect. It went straight to a recording about high call volume and to call back later. Call back later. I stood there with the phone in my hand and wanted to throw it through the dock door. Rich finally did the only thing that made sense. He ordered every bay door open. He ordered dock fans turned on. Those big wall-mounted fans exist for exhaust and heat. He cranked them to full. He told everyone to get out of the cooler bay area. 2 people ignored him because they were trying to help Oscar. They dragged Oscar by his arms, scraping him across the floor. They got him to the dock and dropped him on a flattened piece of cardboard. Oscar's eyes were open, unfocused. He tried to breathe and it looked hard. I got close enough to check Oscar's pulse at his wrist without touching his face. His pulse was fast and weak. I told Rich to keep him in fresh air. I told Rich to keep him sitting up if possible. Rich stared at me with wet eyes and asked me what the gas was. I told him I did not know. I told him the warning suggested it was dangerous in enclosed spaces. Rich looked at the torn plastic wrap and the ripped tape and started swearing under his breath. The unmarked pallet was half open inside the cooler bay. I could see metal canisters and black foam inserts, not food, not medicine, not masks, canisters with printed hazard diamonds and small valves. That sight turned my stomach. Someone had sent industrial chemicals into a food warehouse and then ordered workers to open them indoors. The guard who had collapsed started wheezing. His partner shouted at Rich to call a medic. Rich shouted back that he could not get a medic. The partner looked around, then pulled a small first aid kit from his belt and tore it open. He looked at the contents and realized it was bandages and antiseptic wipes. Nothing for lungs. I backed away from the dock door and told Manny I was leaving. Manny stared at me. He said, "You cannot just walk off." I told Manny I had a kid at home. I told him people were already exposed and the best I could do now was warn others not to repeat it. Manny coughed again and did not argue. Before I left, I took a marker from my bag and wrote on a big piece of cardboard, "Do not open indoors. Gas release. Keep doors open. Move out." I taped it to the dock door frame where everyone would see it. Then I walked away fast, breathing shallow, trying not to pull that sharp smell into my lungs. In my car, I drove with the windows down even though it was cold. I kept my face turned slightly away from the warehouse. I kept thinking about Oscar. He was young. He had a family somewhere. He took a risk for hours. That risk did not pay him back. That is how this whole month had worked. Risks piled up, and the payoff kept getting stolen by reality. On the way home, I saw a fire engine parked outside a strip mall in Avenel. No lights. 2 firefighters stood by the truck and talked to a man holding a clipboard. They were not rushing. They were negotiating. That is what response looked like now, not action. Negotiation, limits, triage. Back at my building, Keisha opened her door the moment she heard my footsteps. She asked if I was okay. I told her a pallet got opened indoors at the warehouse and people got hurt. I told her it was chemicals. Her eyes widened. She asked if I brought anything home on my clothes. I told her I stayed outside. I told her I aired out in the car. She told me to strip at my door and bag my clothes anyway. I did it without arguing. Pride is useless now. Troy was sitting on the couch in the same spot. He looked at my face and knew something went wrong. He did not ask what. He asked, "Did someone die?" That question should not come from a 9-year-old. I told him I did not know yet. I told him someone got very sick. Troy nodded slowly and stared at his hands. I went into the bathroom and looked at the tub. The sheet-covered shape did not move. The air smelled faintly of bleach and stale water. I had been avoiding that room, not because I forgot, because I could not carry it and still function. I closed the door again and leaned my forehead against it for a second. Then I stepped away and washed my hands until my skin felt raw. That afternoon, the building got a notice taped to the lobby glass, not from our superintendent, from the township. It said there would be wellness checks and relocation assistance for residents in multi-unit buildings. It said teams would arrive in 48 hours. It told residents to prepare essential items and medication lists. It said anyone with symptoms should identify himself to the team for transport to a care facility. I read that notice 3 times. The words were clean. The implications were not. If teams were coming building to building, that meant either the government had regained enough control to push people around, or the government had gotten desperate enough to gather people into centralized places. Either way, it meant my locked door would stop being my choice. Keisha knocked on my door around 5. She told me 2 men came through earlier asking who had kids. She told me those men were not from the township. She told me one of them said a bus pickup was coming soon and anyone who stayed would be labeled non-compliant. She told me she told them nothing. She said she watched them write something on a clipboard anyway. She told me to make a plan. I turned the transmitter on again and talked. I told anyone listening that containment achieved did not match what I saw. I told them a chemical pallet had been delivered to a food warehouse with a warning not to open indoors and workers were ordered to open it indoors anyway. I told them people got hurt and emergency response did not show fast. I told them to treat any unmarked aid shipments with caution. I told them to keep doors and windows open if they had to open anything industrial. I told them to trust their nose. If air burns, leave. After the transmission, I heard another voice break in. A woman, calm, tired. She said she lived in Jersey City and teams had already come through her building. She said they took people who were coughing and anyone who admitted fever. She said a neighbor refused and got handcuffed. She said a bus took them away and nobody knew where. She said her building got sealed afterward and the hallways smelled sharp for hours. She said people who stayed inside got headaches and nausea. She said she slept with wet towels at the door gap because the smell scared her. Then her signal cut. That made the warehouse pallet click in my head in a new way. The chemicals, the sharp smell, the idea of sealing buildings. I sat at my table and stared at the notice again. Relocation assistance. Wellness checks. Those words could cover forced removal. They could cover chemical decontamination. They could cover both. I called Maribel again. This time she answered. Her voice sounded hollow. She said her husband had gotten worse and a city worker had told her to stay inside and wait. She asked about Denise and I told her the truth. There was a long silence. Then Maribel made a sound, not crying, more a low exhale of pain. She asked where Denise was. I told her Denise was in my bathroom. I told her I did not know what to do. Maribel said she could not come. She said she could not even get down her own stairwell without passing neighbors who were sick. She told me to do whatever I had to do. Then she said she was sorry about Troy. She asked if Troy was eating. I said yes, mostly. Maribel told me to keep him warm and keep him hydrated. Then she started coughing and ended the call. That night, the power flickered again, longer this time. Lights went out for 5 seconds. Troy sat up fast. I told him it was okay. Then the lights came back and the building sighed. You can hear a building sigh when power returns. Fans start, fridges hum, someone's television blares through a wall. We had gotten used to those noises. Silence felt dangerous now. Around 10, loud banging started in the hallway. A man shouted at someone to open up. Another voice yelled back. A door opened. There was a scuffle, a thud, a woman screaming. I moved Troy into my bedroom and closed the door. I told him to stay quiet. I did not say why. I did not want his head filling in the details. I stood behind my door and listened. Footsteps ran down the hall. Someone cursed. I heard a heavy impact against a door, then another. Then a man's voice said, "We know you got food. We saw you carry bags." That voice was close. It was in my hallway. It was not a request. My doorknob turned. Pressure against the deadbolt. Then the door shook once, hard. The chair under the knob scraped against the floor. I put my shoulder against the door and held it. My hands were shaking, but my body stayed steady. I kept thinking about Troy behind me. I kept thinking about Keisha. About her promise to take him if I did not come back. I kept thinking about how fast a month turns you into someone who measures life in contingency plans. The door shook again. Then a voice from down the hall shouted, "Police!" It did not sound official. It sounded forced, a bluff. Another voice shouted back, "Shut up, you idiot!" Footsteps pounded. Something crashed. Then the noise moved away toward the stairwell. I heard the stairwell door slam. Then the hallway went quiet again, except for someone sobbing behind a door. I kept my shoulder against my door for another full minute, listening for a return. Nothing. I went to the bedroom and found Troy sitting on my bed, eyes wide, silent. He whispered, "Are they coming?" I told him I did not know. I told him we were leaving soon. The next morning I woke up and decided the building was done. Not condemned, not on fire, just done as a safe place. People were hungry. People were desperate. Teams were coming with buses and wellness checks. The warehouse proved that aid could be chemicals and orders could be lethal. I did not want Troy inside this building when strangers with clipboards and masks decided who belonged in a bus. Leaving meant choices that felt ugly. Denise's body could not come with us. I could not carry a body downstairs and put it in my car without drawing attention. I could not leave it in the tub and pretend it did not matter. I wrote a note to Maribel with my phone number, with the date written out, with a simple statement. Denise died on day 27. Denise is in the tub. I am sorry. Troy is with me. I taped the note to the inside of the bathroom door in a plastic bag to protect it from moisture. Then I shut the bathroom door and taped the edges with duct tape. Not airtight, not perfect. Just one more barrier. I packed a duffel with clothes, canned food, 2 bottles of water, my battery and inverter, the transmitter board, and a blanket for etched Troy. I grabbed my car keys. I grabbed the notebook. I grabbed the marker again. I left most things behind. I left furniture, electronics, memories. None of that mattered if Troy could not sleep safely. Keisha met me in the hallway. She had her own bag. She said she was leaving too. She said her cousin in Piscataway had a townhouse and a basement and a grill. She asked where I was going. I said I did not know. I said I wanted out of dense apartment buildings. I said I might head west toward Flemington or farther, maybe toward open land where buses did not do door-to-door pickups. Keisha nodded and told me the township would hit major highways with checkpoints soon. She said the smaller county roads might be safer. We went down the stairs together, quiet. On the second-floor landing, we passed a door with red tape across it. Someone had written "sick" in thick black letters. The tape was fresh. The marker ink still looked wet. That meant a neighbor had been marked in the last few hours. Keisha avoided looking at it. Troy looked, then looked away fast. In the parking lot, 2 men stood by a car with the hood up, siphoning gas with a hose into a container. They looked up when we came out. One of them had a metal pipe. The other had a knife. Neither looked sick. Both looked hungry. Keisha stepped in front of Troy without thinking. I held my bag in front of my body and kept walking toward my car. One of the men called out and asked where we were going. His voice sounded casual. His eyes did not. I did not answer. I opened my car door and pushed Troy in fast. Keisha got into her car too. The man with the pipe walked toward me. I shut my door and locked it. He knocked on the window with the pipe, not hard, just a tap to prove he could. He asked if I had food. I stared at him through the glass and did not speak. He asked if I had gas. I still did not speak. He raised the pipe slightly, then lowered it. That was a decision point. He decided I was not worth the effort right then, or he decided he did not want to break a window and draw attention. He stepped back and waved me off with a frustrated flick of his hand. I started the engine and pulled out slow, not peeling out, not inviting a chase. Keisha followed in her car. We drove out together, two vehicles leaving a building that had stopped being a home. At the intersection, she honked once, waved, then turned south toward Piscataway. I turned west. I took back roads through Metuchen and toward the more open stretches near South Plainfield, trying to avoid the turnpike. Every few blocks I saw a new sign taped to a door. Closed due to black flu. Some signs were polite, some were angry. One liquor store had a plywood sheet with no entry written in big letters and a hole cut out for passing cash and bottles. People adapt fast when money still works. Gas became my first real problem. I had half a tank. Half a tank is freedom for a while, then it becomes a countdown. I passed 3 stations that were closed. The 4th had cars lined up around the block. A man stood at the entrance holding a baseball bat and pointing at a sign that said cash only. He waved cars forward one at a time and shouted at anyone who tried to cut. This was not a clerk. This was a self-appointed traffic controller. I did not join the line. Lines were targets. Lines attracted arguments, and arguments turned into violence fast now. I kept driving. I headed toward Route 22, then took smaller turns whenever I saw a cluster of cars. The next problem was Troy. He started coughing again, deeper, and he kept rubbing his chest. I asked if it hurt. He said it felt tight. He tried to breathe through it, trying to be tough. I pulled over behind a closed diner in a quiet lot and made him sip water. I checked his temperature with the cheap thermometer. It read 100.1 Fahrenheit, not high, not good either. He asked if he was going to die. I told him no. I told him we were going to keep moving and keep him warm and keep him drinking. I said it with confidence I did not feel. We got back on the road. I tried to call a friend who lived in Hunterdon County. The call did not connect. I tried texting. It sat undelivered. Service bars meant nothing now. Your phone could show signal and still fail. Towers might be up and the backhaul might be dead. People forget that part. Phones do not work by magic. They work by layers of systems, and layers were peeling off. By mid-afternoon, I hit my first checkpoint, not military. Township police and county officers, 2 cruisers blocking half the road. Orange cones, a couple of men in reflective vests with clipboards. The officers wore masks. One officer waved cars through. Another stopped some cars and asked questions through a cracked window. When my turn came, an officer leaned toward my window and asked where I was going. I told him I was taking my nephew to family out west. I did not say Troy. I did not say kid. I said nephew, family west. The officer asked if anyone in the car had symptoms. Troy coughed right then, quiet but clear. The officer's eyes sharpened. He asked Troy's age. I said 9. He asked if Troy had a fever. I said no. That was a lie by fractions. Troy had a low fever. I lied anyway. The officer told me to pull into the shoulder. My hands tightened on the wheel. I pulled over. The officer walked back to his cruiser, talked to someone, then came back with a different man. This man wore a white Tyvek suit, hood up, face shield down. He had a sprayer tank on his back and gloves taped at the wrists. He looked official in a way that felt wrong, see in daylight. The man in the suit told me to step out of the car. His voice came through the face shield, muffled. He told me Troy needed screening. He said there was a pediatric triage site in Somerville. He said they had transport. He said it was for containment. Containment again. That word followed me everywhere, always attached to control. I told him no. I said Troy was going to family. I said Troy was fine. The suited man said cough plus travel meant risk. He said if I refused, I would be recorded as non-compliant and I might be detained. The officer behind him rested a hand near his belt. He did not draw. He did not need to. His posture was enough. I tried to keep my voice steady. I asked if I could drive Troy myself to the triage site if it was truly medical. I asked if I could stay with him the whole time. The suited man hesitated. That hesitation told me the answer. This was not a clinic visit. This was a handoff. You do not hand off a child to a system that cannot promise a caregiver stays. Troy started crying. Quiet. Shaking. The officer looked at Troy and his eyes softened for a second. Then his eyes hardened again because sympathy does not change policy. The suited man told Troy it would be okay. Troy shook his head hard. He grabbed my jacket. He pressed his face into my side. His body trembled. That moment forced my decision. I was not negotiating anymore. I was leaving. I told the officer I would turn around and go home. I said we were not going west. I said we were going back. The suited man nodded, satisfied, already turning away. He wanted compliance, not truth. I got back in the car and started the engine. I turned the wheel slowly and began moving back toward the road. The suited man stepped away, waving me on, already focused on the next car. The officer walked back to his cruiser. Nobody expected me to do anything else. I did not go back east. I drove a quarter mile, turned onto a side road the moment I saw an opening, and kept going deeper into smaller streets, away from the checkpoint. My hands shook so hard I almost missed a turn. Troy sobbed in the passenger seat, trying to catch his breath between coughs. I kept telling him to breathe slow, drink water. I could hear my voice rising. I forced it down. Now I had a new problem. I had crossed into an area where I did not know the roads well, and my phone maps did not load. I drove by memory and by street signs, aiming for anything that pointed toward rural stretches. I saw a sign for Reddington Township and felt relief because it meant fewer apartment buildings, fewer buses. We found an empty parking lot beside a closed hardware store. I pulled in and shut the engine off to save gas. I opened the windows a crack. I gave Troy water and made him eat a few bites of a granola bar. He chewed slow, eyes red, face sticky with tears. I looked at my radio gear in the bag and made a decision that felt risky but necessary. I could not stay silent. Checkpoints were screening kids. Buildings were being checked, then sealed. Chemical pallets were being shipped into food warehouses. The word containment was being used to justify anything. I set up the battery, an inverter in the back seat with the doors closed enough to hide what I was doing from anyone passing. I ran the microphone cable to the front. I kept the transmission short. I said there were checkpoints screening families and pushing coughing people toward transport sites. I said if you have a child with a cough, do not assume you can pass. I said if officials offer transport, demand to stay with your child. If they refuse, treat it as forced separation. I said do not let anyone take your kid without a plan to reunite. I also said something else because the warehouse kept burning in my head. I said any decontamination that involves sealing a building and introducing chemicals can injure or kill people inside. I said I saw people harmed at a warehouse from gas released indoors. I said do not stay in a building if officials seal doors and the air smells sharp. Get out before it happens. Do not wait. Right after I transmitted, a different voice came in, stronger than the others, with a controlled tone. Not the polished radio host voice, something between official and local. A man said there were false rumors causing panic. He said relocation and screening were voluntary. He said decontamination procedures were safe and overseen by trained personnel. He said anyone interfering would be prosecuted. He said the state was stabilizing and citizens should cooperate. I listened to that voice and felt cold anger settle in. The man did not address any specific detail I mentioned. He did not mention the chemical pallet. He did not mention kids being separated. He spoke in generalities and threats. That voice was not there to inform, it was there to pressure. I shut down my transmission and packed the gear fast. I did not want to be easy to locate. I do not know if anyone could locate me from a small signal, but I did not want to test it. We stayed in that lot until dusk. Then we drove again, aiming for quiet. I found a narrow road that led toward a cluster of farm fields and scattered houses. The sky was clear. The air smelled of cold soil and manure. That smell calmed me because it meant life was still running in some pockets. Farms do not care about press conferences. Farms care about water, feed, and labor. I pulled into a dirt turnout near a tree line and shut the car off. It was not a campsite. It was a place to disappear for a night. I covered the windows with a blanket and a jacket. I told Troy we were sleeping in the car. He asked if the bad men would find us. I told him no. I did not know. Troy fell asleep first. His breathing was rough but steady. I stayed awake, listening to distant traffic that sounded thin, and to the radio, which mostly held static and fragments. Around midnight, I heard a burst of transmissions from multiple voices talking over each other. Someone said there was a fire at a facility near Newark. Someone said it was a chemical release. Someone said a hospital evacuated a wing. Someone said buses were rerouted. Nobody sounded certain. People sounded scared and tired and angry. Around 2 a.m, headlights swept across the field edge. A vehicle moved slow on the road. I held my breath and stayed still. The vehicle stopped for a moment, then continued. I did not move until the sound faded. Morning came and Troy woke up coughing harder. He sat up and gagged on the cough, then spit dark mucus into a tissue. Not blood. Dark, thick mucus. That sight made the black flu name feel real in a new way. I kept my face neutral. I told Troy it was okay. I told him the tissue needed to go in a bag. I tied it off, put it in a second bag, and set it in the trunk. Troy asked if he was contagious. I told him probably. I told him that did not make him bad. I told him we would keep distance from people and keep washing hands and cover coughs. He nodded and looked ashamed anyway. Kids blame themselves for everything. That is their default. We needed water. We needed food soon. My supplies were limited and the car could not be our world forever. I drove toward a small town center that looked active enough to have a store but quiet enough to avoid checkpoints. I found a convenience store with the lights on and the door locked. A man inside waved me to a side window. He pointed at a sign that said, "1 customer at a time and mask required." I put my mask on and had Troy stay in the car. The man unlocked the door for me only, then locked it behind me. Inside, shelves were half empty. The man stood behind a plexiglass barrier and kept a baseball bat under the counter. He asked what I needed. I asked for water, soup, cough medicine for a child. He shook his head at the cough medicine. He said it was gone days ago. He said he had some electrolyte packets and some canned broth. I bought what I could with cash. He told me not to linger. I did not. When I walked out, a woman in a mask was waiting 6 feet away, clutching a bag. She asked if the store had baby formula. I said I did not know. She asked me again as if my answer could change. I told her I did not see any. Her shoulders sagged. Then she looked at my car and saw Troy in the passenger seat. Her eyes tightened. She did not come closer. She turned away fast and walked back to a minivan with a dented bumper. We drove again, west and north, away from dense areas. I aimed for the kind of roads where you see more deer than police. I also kept thinking about the warehouse. I kept thinking about Oscar and Manny and Rich. I did not know if Oscar lived. I did not know if Manny's chest pain turned into something worse. I did not know if that chemical pallet was an accident or a pattern. Around noon, my phone buzzed. 1 bar of service, then a text came through from Keisha. It was short. She said teams came to our building early. She said some residents got loaded onto a bus. She said a man refused and got hit. She said the hallway smelled sharp afterward. She said she left through a back stairwell before they sealed the main entrance. She said she had Troy's name written down by the clipboard men. She said I needed to keep moving and stay off main highways. Then her messages stopped. I read that text twice, then turned my phone off to save battery. Troy asked what it said. I told him people came to the building. I told him Keisha left. I did not tell him about the smell. I did not tell him his name was on a list. He did not need more weight. That afternoon, I found an abandoned maintenance shed near a small municipal park. It was not locked. The door hung crooked. Inside was a concrete floor, a couple of rusty tools, and an old metal cabinet. It smelled of oil and damp. It was not comfortable, but it was a roof and walls. I moved our bags inside and set Troy up on a blanket. I kept the shed door cracked for airflow. I did not want sealed air ever again. Not after the warehouse story, not after Keisha's text. I wiped down a corner of the floor with bleach solution, then told myself to stop. Dirt would not kill us faster than exposure to strangers would. Troy slept for hours. His fever rose slightly, then fell. His cough stayed. I kept giving him water and broth. I listened to his breathing and counted his breath sometimes. Not because I knew medicine, because counting made me feel less helpless. When Troy slept, I transmitted again from the shed. I told listeners about Keisha's message. I told them teams were visiting apartment buildings early and sealing entrances. I told them people were being loaded onto buses. I told them about the sharp smell. I said I believed decontamination chemicals were being used on residential buildings. I said if you live in a multi-unit building and you see clipboards, suits, buses, leave before they come back. I said if you stay, keep windows open and be ready to exit fast. I also told them the warehouse chemical pallet had hazard-labeled canisters. I described the hiss, the coughing, the collapse. I said it was not rumor. I said I saw it with my own eyes. I said do not accept claims that all procedures are safe. Safety requires honesty, and honesty was scarce. A voice responded after a minute, shaky, angry. A man said he lived in an apartment complex in Elizabeth and a team sealed his hallway last week. He said the smell gave him a headache and his wife vomited. He said the team told him it was cleaning. He said his neighbor, an older woman, stopped breathing during the smell and nobody helped. He said the team told him she died of black flu and wrote it down and moved on. He said he watched them tape her door shut. He started crying mid-sentence and his transmission cut. That was the moment my denial finally died. Not slowly, fully. The pattern was clear. Containment was not medicine. Containment was control. And control was being enforced with chemicals and buses because the healthcare system had collapsed and nobody wanted to admit it. I sat on the shed floor with my back against the wall and forced myself to make a plan that did not depend on anyone helping us. Plan: avoid checkpoints, avoid buildings, avoid shelters, avoid buses. Find a single-family structure with water access, distance, and a way to lock doors without sharing hallways. I remembered an old coworker, a woman named Talia Brenner, who once told me her uncle owned a small cabin near Round Valley Reservoir in Clinton Township. I had met Talia at a holiday party years ago. We were not close. I barely had her number saved. I turned my phone on again and tried calling. The call did not connect. I tried again. It went through, then rang, then a voicemail picked up. I left a message fast and plain. I said it was Hale. I said I was with Troy, Denise's son. I said we needed somewhere isolated for a few days. I said I could trade food work, clean up, anything. I said I did not want to bring trouble. Then I hung up. 2 hours later, her text came through. One sentence: cabin is empty. If you get there, do not light a fire. People watch smoke. Key is under the back step. Bring water. Pump is manual. That text felt like a rope thrown from the dark. I packed fast. I woke Troy gently. He looked at my face and knew we were moving. He did not complain. He stood up, swayed a little, then grabbed his blanket and his backpack without being told. Driving toward Round Valley, we stayed on small roads, skirting towns. The closer we got, the more signs of strain we saw. A farm stand with its windows smashed. A roadside mailbox burned. A stop sign bent at a sharp angle. None of it was dramatic. It was the slow breakdown of basic respect. We passed a school parking lot full of cars. No kids, no teachers, just cars sitting, some with flat tires now. I realized people had abandoned vehicles wherever they happened to be when life got complicated. Nobody came back for them. Ownership stopped meaning anything when survival took over. Near the reservoir area, I hit another checkpoint, smaller than the first. One cruiser, one officer, one man in a vest. I turned onto a side road before I got close. I drove through a neighborhood of neat houses with dark windows and uncut lawns. I saw one man on a porch holding a rifle across his lap. He watched every car pass. He did not wave. He did not threaten. He just watched. That was enough. By late afternoon, we reached the cabin. It sat back from the road behind bare trees, small, weathered, with a sagging porch step. No smoke, no lights, no sign of life. Perfect. I parked behind the cabin, not out front. I kept the car keys in my pocket and told Troy to stay close. The key was under the back step, taped to a piece of wood. The door opened with a stiff groan. Inside, it smelled of dust, old wood, and mouse droppings. There was a small propane stove, empty tanks stacked near it, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed, and a couch that had seen better decades. The windows were intact. The locks worked. I opened windows on opposite sides for airflow, then closed them to a crack and locked them. I checked every room. No one hiding. No surprises. Just emptiness and the sound of wind through trees. The manual pump was outside near a capped well pipe. I worked the handle and nothing came at first. Then water sputtered, brownish for a second, then cleared. I filled containers slowly, letting the first dirty flow run off. I brought water inside and set it on the table. I told Troy this was home for now. Troy nodded and sat on the couch and let his shoulders drop for the first time in days. That night I did not transmit for a while. I listened. I wanted to know if the air was different out here, if signals carried, if voices sounded closer. The static felt calmer. The few transmissions I heard were scattered, weak. A man in Princeton talking about campus buildings being used for triage. A woman in Trenton asking if anyone had insulin. A short, angry rant about containment lies. Then silence again. Troy slept on the bed. I slept on the floor near the door with the knife beside me. Not because I thought I could fight off armed men, because it helped me stay calm enough to sleep at all. The next day I woke to birds outside in a quiet that felt unreal after the city. Troy's fever was down. His cough stayed, but he could breathe without that tight, panicky rhythm. He ate broth, and even asked for more. That request felt normal in a way that almost made me cry. I swallowed it and just nodded and heated more. We spent the day cleaning the cabin in a practical way. Sweep, wipe surfaces, check for holes. Move food into a cabinet, set a bucket for waste in case the toilet stopped working. There was no plumbing here, no toilet, just an old composting setup out back. It was not comfortable. It was controllable. In the afternoon, I walked the perimeter and saw footprints in the dirt near the road. Recent, not ours. Someone had walked past the cabin recently, maybe even checked it. My stomach tightened. I looked for tire tracks. None close, just footprints and a small piece of candy wrapper caught in a branch. That meant a person, not a crew. One person wandering, looking for shelter. I decided we would not stay invisible forever. We would stay quiet, but prepared. I moved the car farther back behind trees and covered parts of it with branches, not to hide fully, just to reduce shine. I kept the cabin lights off at night. I told Troy not to go outside alone. He nodded without arguing. He had learned fast. That evening, I transmitted it. Again, I told listeners I had left my apartment building because wellness teams were sealing entrances and loading residents onto buses. I told them I had confirmation from a voice in Jersey City and from Keisha's message. I told them decontamination chemicals were being used in enclosed spaces. I told them I believed the warehouse pallet was part of that program and opening it indoors hurt people. I also said something that felt risky. I said the phrase, containment achieved, was being used as cover for forced relocation and chemical sealing operations. I said anyone still in a multi-unit building should plan an exit route that does not require an elevator or a main lobby door. I said leave before teams arrive, not during. I said do not trust promises that transport is voluntary if refusal gets you labeled. A new voice came on after I finished, tight and official, cutting through static with strength. A man warned that unauthorized transmissions interfering with public safety operations would be prosecuted. He said citizens should rely on verified sources and local authorities. He said rumors about chemical harm were misinformation. He said screening and relocation saved lives. I waited until he finished, then keyed in one last time and spoke directly to him without naming him. I said if relocation saved lives, then families should be allowed to stay together. I said if chemicals were safe, then officials should publish the agent name and concentration limits and ventilation requirements. I said if any of this was truly medical, then questions should have answers, not threats. Then I shut down the transmitter. That night, headlights appeared on the road again. This time, the vehicle slowed near the cabin driveway. I watched through a crack in the curtain. A pickup truck rolled to a stop. Two men got out. Both wore hoodies. One held a flashlight. They did not look like officials. They walked toward the cabin, slow, deliberate. Troy was asleep and I did not wake him. I moved to the door and stayed silent, breathing shallow. The men reached the porch. One tried the door handle, locked. He leaned down and looked through the window crack. I stayed back from the window. I did not want my face to show in the weak light. The other man circled toward the back step where the key had been. He must have known the trick. He bent down, searched under the step, and found nothing. I had removed it and kept it in my pocket now. The man cursed quietly. Then both men stood still on the porch, talking in whispers I could not hear. One of them knocked, soft. Not a police knock, a test knock. Then he knocked again, harder. He called out, "Anybody home?" His voice tried to sound friendly. It carried impatience under the friendliness. I did not answer. I stayed still. A minute passed. Then the man said louder, "We just want to talk. We got food to trade." He did not sound honest. Men with food to trade do not drive around at night checking cabins. Men with food to trade wait for people to come to them. The man stepped back and kicked the door once, not full force, more a message. The cabin door shuddered. The lock held. Then he kicked again, harder. The door frame creaked. I felt my muscles tighten. I held the knife in my hand and hated it, because the knife was a lie. It was not protection. It was a comfort object. The men stopped kicking and moved toward a window. I heard the flashlight beam slide across glass. One of them tapped the glass with something hard. Not a rock. Something metal. Then I heard the small sound of a glass edge cracking. I made a decision in that moment that I still do not know how to judge. I did not wait for them to get inside. I grabbed my car keys in my bag, moved to Troy, and shook him awake gently. He opened his eyes, and I put a hand over his mouth lightly and whispered his name. I told him to stand up. Quiet, shoes on. He did it without hesitation. That hurt too. A kid should not wake up ready to run. Troy grabbed his backpack. I grabbed the battery and transmitter bag and left everything else. Food, blankets, all of it. Stuff can be replaced. Troy cannot. We slipped out the back door into the cold night. The men were at the front window. They did not see us. We moved low, fast, toward the car behind the trees. Troy's cough tried to rise in his throat, and he swallowed it. He held it back, face tight. We got into the car, and I did not turn on headlights. I started the engine and backed up slowly, tires crunching on gravel. The sound felt loud in the night. One of the men shouted something from the porch. A flashlight beam swung toward the back. The beam caught the car for a second, then lost it behind branches. I pulled onto the road and hit the gas. The pickup truck engine roared behind us. Headlights flared. They were chasing. My heart hammered. Troy started crying again, silent tears. I kept both hands on the wheel and drove hard, taking turns faster than I wanted, praying I would not hit a deer, praying I would not slide into a ditch. The chase lasted 5 minutes. It felt longer. The road twisted and narrowed. I knew nothing about these back roads, and I still took them fast because going slow meant getting boxed in. The pickup stayed behind me, then fell back on a sharp turn. I heard tires squeal. Then I saw headlights wobble, then drop out of sight for a second. Maybe the driver braked hard. Maybe he went into a ditch. Maybe he just backed off. I did not slow to find out. I kept driving until I hit a wider road in a lit intersection. I turned without signaling and kept going, then turned again, making a messy loop to lose anyone following. After 10 minutes, no headlights behind me. I slowed and pulled into a church parking lot with the lights off. I shut the engine off and sat there shaking, trying to breathe quietly. Troy whispered, "Why?" I did not have an answer that would make sense to a child. I told him some people were hunting for places to take. I told him we could not let strangers into our space. He asked if they would kill us. I said I did not know. I said I was not going to give them a chance. We could not go back to the cabin. Even if the men left, the cabin was compromised. They knew it existed. They knew someone was inside. They would come back, maybe with more men. I had lost that rope in the dark. I drove east again, not all the way back toward cities, but toward somewhere I remembered from my warehouse driving days. There are industrial parks with empty office buildings. There are loading docks with sheltered corners. There are places with cameras that do not work anymore but still scare casual looters. I aimed for one of those places because it had two things: concealment and exits. Near dawn, we reached a small commercial area outside Clinton, near the highway ramps, but not directly on them. I found an old office building with a rear lot and a service entrance that looked neglected but intact. The front door was chained. The rear door had a deadbolt. The window beside it was already cracked from an older break-in, but the opening was small. I did not break in. I checked the trash bins and found discarded paperwork and an old security badge clipped to a lanyard. I used the badge edge to test the door gap and realized the latch did not seat fully. The door could be pushed open with steady pressure. That meant someone had already been inside and left it sloppy. I pushed the door slowly and it opened. Inside smelled stale and dusty, carpet tiles, dead fluorescent lights. A lobby desk with a stack of old mail, No signs of people. I moved room to room, quiet, checking corners. I found a small office with no windows and a door that closed. I moved Troy into that office and told him to sleep. He collapsed on the carpet and fell asleep in minutes. I sat against the wall with the transmitter bag in my lap and realized I was running out of options. Not supplies yet, not fuel yet, options. Every place became unsafe within hours because people were hunting. People were hungry. People were getting forced onto buses. The countryside was not a safe zone. It was just a different kind of danger. I transmitted one more time from that office building, keeping it short. I said I tried to shelter in a cabin near Round Valley and got chased out by men looking to take it. I said if you go rural, do not assume isolation equals safety. I said keep an exit plan. I said never keep your only key in a predictable spot. I said avoid smoke, avoid light, avoid patterns. I said trust movement and noise more than announcements. Then I said the hardest part out loud, because people needed to hear it even if it sounded cruel. I said if officials are sealing buildings and pushing people onto buses, do not wait for permission to leave. Leave early. Leave quiet. Leave with only what you can carry. I said if you have someone sick in your home, decide now whether you will stay with that person or separate, because the system will decide for you if you hesitate. After I transmitted, I listened and heard almost nothing. The airwaves felt emptier. Either fewer people had power or fewer people had the will to talk. Silence is contagious too. Around noon, Troy woke up and asked for water. His voice sounded raspy. I gave him sips and watched his eyes. He looked clearer than yesterday. His cough was still present, but it sounded less deep. That gave me a thread of hope that made me careful. Hope makes you sloppy if you let it. We stayed in the office building for 2 days. I rationed food. I used the restroom carefully, flushing only when necessary because I did not know how stable the water system was here. I kept the doors locked from the inside with furniture. I did not light anything. I did not make noise. I listened to the outside for footsteps and engines. On the second night, I heard trucks on the main road, multiple, heavy. Then I heard a loudspeaker voice, faint through the walls, repeating something about mandatory screening and transport. The voice sounded official. It sounded practiced. It sounded exactly like the type of stability voice I had been hearing for weeks, only now it was traveling street to street. I peeked through a cracked blind in a front office window and saw a bus on the road, flanked by a pickup with emergency lights and another vehicle with men in suits. The suits were white. The bus moved slow, stopping at intersections, then moving again. They were not here by accident. They were sweeping. I backed away from the window and felt my mouth go dry. The sweep had reached even here, not just apartment buildings, commercial areas too. If they were sweeping, then hiding in an office building was a temporary trick. Temporary tricks were my whole month. That night I made a final decision. I was done running within the same radius. Every zone connected to New Jersey's dense corridor was being managed through checkpoints and sweeps. I needed to cross a line that those buses were not covering yet. The simplest line was the Delaware River. Pennsylvania, rural stretches where townships are smaller and sweep coverage takes longer. It was not a magic fix. It was time. I waited until pre-dawn and moved. I packed the battery and transmitter again, kept the bag light, put Troy in the passenger seat, and drove west toward Interstate 78 but avoided the main ramps. I took county roads, then joined the highway only briefly when it looked empty. Near the river, traffic got weird. A few cars clustered, then nothing. I saw a wreck on the shoulder. A sedan with its front end smashed into the guardrail. No emergency vehicles, no cones, just abandonment. I passed it without slowing much. The bridge approach had a checkpoint, of course. Cones, barricades, an officer waving people into a line. I saw the line and turned off at the last exit. I drove through Phillipsburg side streets and found a smaller crossing farther north. The smaller crossing had no checkpoint, just a locked gate on one side road and a bunch of warning signs. I kept searching until I found a back bridge that locals use, narrow, older, with no visible police presence. Crossing that bridge felt wrong because I'd spent weeks seeing control points everywhere. The absence of control felt suspicious. I crossed anyway. I did not look back until the far side. Pennsylvania did not look safer. It looked quieter. The gas station near the bridge was closed and boarded. A handwritten sign said no gas. The town streets were mostly empty. I kept driving, aiming for open farmland. 2 miles in, the car sputtered. The fuel gauge dropped faster than it should have. Then the engine cut. I coasted onto a gravel shoulder and sat there staring at the wheel. Half a tank had turned into almost nothing. Either my gauge was wrong or I had a leak, or someone had siphoned my tank while I was asleep in the city at some point. The reason did not matter. The car was dead. Troy looked at me with wide eyes. He asked if we were stuck. I told him yes, for now. I told him to stay calm. I told him we had water and food for a bit. That was true. I did not tell him what I was thinking. Walking with a coughing child in a collapsing world gets you found fast. I popped the trunk and checked for fuel smell. I saw wetness under the rear area. That meant a leak or a puncture. I checked under the car with my phone light and saw a dark drip line near the tank area. Somebody could have stabbed it, or road debris could have hit it. Either way, it was not drivable. I sat on the ground beside the car and forced myself to think in steps. Step 1, move off the road, reduce visibility. Step 2, find shelter nearby. Step 3, locate fuel or help without walking into a trap. Step 4, keep Troy breathing. There was a farmhouse about a quarter-mile away, visible across a field. No smoke, no lights. There was also a stand of trees along a creek line closer, offering cover. I chose the trees first. Farmhouses draw eyes, trees hide you. I loaded what I could carry into 2 bags and had Troy carry only his backpack. We left the car locked, not because locks stop hungry people, because the car still held the rest of our supplies and I hoped it bought time. We walked to the tree line and found a shallow dip in the ground near the creek. The creek water ran slow, seeing it. I did not drink it. I used bottled water for Troy and saved creek water only for cleaning if needed. We stayed there for hours, listening. No vehicles came, no voices, just wind and distant dogs barking. Troy slept. I watched the farmhouse and saw movement once, a curtain shift, then nothing. Someone was inside or the wind moved it. I could not assume. By evening, I had to decide. Staying in trees without a plan would turn into dehydration and exposure. I needed fuel or a new shelter. I decided to approach the farmhouse at dusk, not full dark, because darkness makes everyone jumpy and jumpy gets people shot. I told Troy to stay hidden in the trees and not move. He shook his head and refused. He said he was not staying alone. His voice broke. I could not force him. I told him to stay behind me and stay quiet. He nodded hard. We walked across the field slow, hands visible. When we got within 50 yards, a porch light snapped on. A man's voice shouted for us to stop. I stopped. I raised my hands. I said my name and said I had a sick child in a car with a fuel leak. I said I was not there to steal. I said I had food to trade. I said we needed a place to sleep and maybe help finding fuel. The man told me to stay put. He came out on the porch holding a shotgun. He did not point it directly, but it was ready. He wore a mask and gloves. He asked how old the child was. I told him 9. He asked if Troy had black flu. I told him Troy had a cough and low fever but was improving. The man said improving did not matter. He said a cough could kill his wife. He said his wife had asthma. He said he was not risking it. I asked if he had a gas can. I asked if he had any spare fuel. I asked if he could at least let me siphon from his tractor in exchange for food. He hesitated. That hesitation was the opening. He was scared, but he was not cruel by default. He told me to back away and wait by a fence post. He said he would bring a gas can and leave it at the edge of the driveway. He said I would leave cash or food in a bag and step back. No contact, no negotiation. I agreed. I had no leverage. He disappeared inside. Troy started coughing again and I held my breath and prayed the man did not take that as a threat. 2 minutes later, the man came out with a red gas can. He walked it to the driveway edge and set it down. He stepped back fast, keeping distance. I set down 2 cans of soup and a sealed bottle of water in a grocery bag and placed it on the fence post. Then I stepped back. The man stared at the food for a moment, then nodded once. He told me the can had about 3 gallons. He told me not to come back. I told him thank you. He did not respond. He went back inside and shut the door. We carried the gas can back to the car, moving quick. The car still sat untouched. No one had found it yet. I poured the fuel into the tank carefully, avoiding spills. I knew the leak would waste some, but I hoped it would be enough to reach the next town with an auto parts store, or at least a place to ditch the car and find a new one. The engine started. That sound felt huge. I drove away without headlights until I reached the main road, then turned them on and kept moving. I did not look back at the farmhouse. We drove deeper into Pennsylvania and found an abandoned rest area off a smaller highway. The bathrooms were locked, the vending machines smashed, the picnic tables were overturned. It was still a place to park without drawing attention. That night, I did not broadcast. I sat in the driver's seat and listened to Troy's breathing, and thought about all the death I had brushed past in 1 month. Denise on my kitchen floor. Oscar on a warehouse dock breathing poison air. The older woman in Elizabeth that man described, dying during a chemical sealing. The man at my building who got hit for refusing a bus. None of them got a memorial. None of them got a news segment. They got erased behind words. I decided my final chapter on the air would not be a rant. It would be a record. Facts, patterns, warnings. If the world rebuilt, it needed to know what happened in the gaps between press conferences. In the morning, I transmitted one last time, longer than I usually dared. I said my name again. Slow. I said I started as a warehouse checker in Woodbridge Township. I said I watched produce shipments shrink, shift, then stop. I said drivers refused routes. I said repair techs stopped coming. I said hospitals stopped showing reality on camera and moved everything into press rooms. I said I drove past an emergency room lot full of idling cars and no movement. I said a month into Black Flu, an unmarked pallet arrived at my warehouse with a warning. Do not open indoors. I said workers were ordered to open it indoors anyway. I said gas released. I said people coughed, collapsed, and emergency services did not arrive. I said the pallet contained industrial canisters, not food or medicine. I said wellness teams began sweeping apartment buildings using buses and chemical sealing that left hallways with sharp smells. I said people were loaded onto buses and separated from families. I said refusals were recorded as non-compliance. I said official voices called it voluntary and safe, while witnesses described harm. I said I took in my neighbor's child after his mother collapsed and died. I said the system offered scripts, not help. I said the kid survived so far because we avoided crowds, avoided shelters, and avoided official transport. I said those choices kept us alive, but those choices also meant we became fugitives from a system that called itself stability. I said containment achieved was a phrase that did not match reality on the ground. I said if you hear that phrase, do not relax. Check your local roads. Check your hospitals. Check whether garbage is still being collected. Check whether repair crews still show up. Check whether people still trust the same rules. I said if you live in a multi-unit building, plan for forced entry and forced relocation. I said keep your most important items ready to carry. I said keep cash if it still works. I said keep water. I said keep medications. I said do not wait until a bus is at your door. I said leave early and leave quietly. I said if you receive any unmarked shipment, any aid pallet with no paperwork, treat it as hazardous until proven otherwise. I said open outdoors only, keep airflow, keep distance, do not trap chemicals in enclosed spaces. Do not believe anyone who tells you to break common sense for compliance. I said the most dangerous thing I watched was not the virus alone. It was the way truth got managed, the way honest voices got cut off, the way words got chosen to reduce panic, then used to justify control. I said a society can survive sickness when it has trust. I said trust was the first thing that died around me. Then I said where I was heading. I said I was moving west with a child, trying to stay ahead of sweeps and checkpoints, trying to find a place where we could rest without being hunted by hunger or policy. I said if anyone heard me and had verified safe shelter, not a bus, not a crowded gym, not a mass site, then keep your porch light off and leave a clear sign in daylight. I said do not broadcast addresses on the air. I said do not trust strangers with details. I finished by saying I did not know if I would transmit again. The battery would run out, the car might die, my voice might fail. I said if my signal stopped, it did not mean containment achieved. It meant the opposite. It meant another ordinary person ran out of space to breathe. I shut down after that and sat in the quiet. Troy woke up and asked if we were going to be okay. I told him we would keep moving, keep making careful choices, keep looking for decent people. He nodded, and leaned his head against the seat and closed his eyes again. If you are still hearing this, if my last transmission is still bouncing somewhere, I want you to take one thing from my month. Do not let calm voices replace your own eyes. Look at the parking lots. Look at the trash. Look at the doors being taped shut. Look at the unmarked pallets. The truth lives in the boring details. That is where the collapse shows first. I am Hale Rook. I am ending now. Not because the story ends, because my power needs to last longer than my words.